When I start speaking and you're tuned to listen to this very podcast, you've chosen among the sea of thousands, maybe millions of podcasts out there to listen to me. And first of all, I'm grateful for that. After all, you spent some time listening to me. Now, let me ask you this. What's the very first thought that crosses your mind as you hear me speak? Not about the content yet, but about something more fundamental. Let me help you with that. The moment I say a word from a sentence, or forming a sentence, or even just pronounce a single syllable in any language, right now it's English, which you understand, maybe because it's your native or professional language, what's the first impression you get? I'm not talking about any preconceived notions or bias you might have, and let's be honest and let's face it, we all have them. It's just human nature. The Germans have a very wonderful word for this, Voreingenommenheit, which translates to pre-perception or bias. But now, what I mean is deeper, almost intensive and very intrinsic question that might pop up in your mind, especially if you don't know me or personally you have not encountered me or have never heard before. The question is, most probably, where this person is from. Now imagine for a moment that I'm speaking in a language that isn't your mother tongue. What's your immediate thought? My guess is that your curiosity would even heighten, wouldn't it? You'd start wondering what language it is. Where is it spoken? And how did this guy learn it at all? And most of all, you'd be itching to know what is his mother tongue. That uncertainty, that curiosity would become even stronger. The burning question in your mind would be, where is this guy actually from? And if I were speaking a language you don't understand, or maybe a language that you do understand and that's your mother tongue, but in a kind of unfamiliar accent or pronunciation, maybe my tone, my intonation, or the way I pronounce and structure my sentence seems a bit off to you. The next question would be, where did he learn this language? You'd wonder why my accent or dialect doesn't quite match the standards you've used to hear. In other words, without even realizing it, you would be linking the language I'm speaking to me as a person, to my very identity. You see, language and identity are deeply, deeply intertwined. And that is exactly what I want to talk about in this episode, the complex and fascinating relationship between language and identity. Welcome to Orientalistics, podcast on language, culture, and religion. This episode, identity and language. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I can cover everything I want to say about language and identity just in one episode. It's a vast and fascinating topic. And as you can probably tell, I'm not speaking from a script. My talk is not scripted. I like to keep it quite natural and spontaneous. just like in all my other episodes. Sure, I have got, of course, a few notes in front of me, just enough to keep me on track. But I'm really improvising, letting the ideas flow in the moment. It's more about, in fact, following the red thread of thought so I don't get lost in the sea of things I want to convey and to talk about. Because of that, I honestly can't tell you upfront how long this discussion is going to be. If I feel there is too much to unpack in one setting, I'll probably break it into 2 or even more episodes. Well, let's see how the things would go. It will evolve naturally. But there is one thing I can promise you. This will be an engaging and passionate conversation. First of all, language and identity are topics very closely to my heart, and of course, that's part of my profession, and it has a very strong tie with my work and my interests. If it turns out that there is more to explore, and I hear that you're keen to dive deeper into this, I'll definitely keep the conversation going. If not, I'll try to keep it within one episode, giving you the essentials, the basic or just a foundation on how language and identity are connected. Either way, we are about to do an intriguing journey together. Language, in many ways, is like a double-edged sword. On one side, it shapes our identity by creating boundaries, whether they are geographical, cultural, or social, dividing us into them and us, or me and you. On the other side, though, it offers me and you, it offers us freedom, opening up new possibilities to break through those very barriers. This idea ties closely with what's known as critical pedagogy, which plays a key role in this discussion. Critical pedagogy isn't just a theory. It's a call to action, especially when it comes to challenging the way marginalized languages and voices are often silenced or sidelined. Instead of accepting the status quo in language and education, it emphasizes the importance of agency, the ability to make intentional choices, especially for those whose identities are tightly constrained by dominant linguistic ideologies. This approach offers a real alternative to what Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator and philosopher who was a leading advocate of critical pedagogy, called it as banking concept of education, where learners are treated like passive recipients, simply absorbing information for instrumental purposes. Freire envisioned something far more dynamic, an education where people learn to critically understand the world around them and their place within it. It's about seeing the world not just as something fixed, vestige, but as something that's always changing. Something that we can actively shape and transform. This idea of liberation through language is incredibly powerful. The choices we make, whether it is the language we speak, the cultural expressions we adopt, or the opportunities we seize, can redefine our identity. Sometimes these choices come from a place of marginalization, where people are fighting to be heard. Other times, they stem from a place of empowerment where language and culture become tools and instruments for transformation. In the discussion that follow, and the chapters that I'm going to deal with, we will explore these cultural and linguistic journeys, seeing firsthand how people are using language to reshape their identities and, in doing so, their realities. Whether marginalized or not, these projects of self-transformation offer fascinating insights into the intersection of language, culture, and personal growth. Identity is something we constantly shape and reshape, not just on our own, but through our interactions with others. It's through everyday social settings, whether is it at work, school, at university, or within our friends and families, that we build and express who we are. Now, when it comes to teenagers, the process of identity information and identity formation becomes even more pronounced as they start to step away from the security and structure provided by their families. The way they shape their personality and spend their leisure time kind of playing and creating a role in shaping or even reinventing their sense of self. Well, why is leisure time is so important? Because it's during this time that young people get to make their own choices about the activities they engage and the friends they have chosen to be surrounded by. These are decisions that, unlike school or family, that seems like obligations and mandatory, are largely theirs and their decision to make. Many teenagers, for instance, choose to participate in physical activities or sports during their free time. But here is the interesting part. The specific activities they chose or they choose can actually say a lot about their individuality and, finally, their identity. Whether they opt for team sports, solo activities, or more niche forms of exercise, their choices reflect personal preferences and values that are integral to how these people see themselves and how they want others to see them. Let me give you an example to start thinking about identity in a broader context. The seemingly simple question, who am I, is one that a lot of people are asking, especially in places like today's, let's say, United States, where cultural diversity is both celebrated, at times a source of confusion. Unlike societies where individuals often identify with a long-lasting, standing national or ethnic heritage, like Europeans, people in the United States find themselves part of a melting pot of different cultures. With the exception of Native Americans, most probably the vast majority of US citizens are descendant from migrants, each of whom brought their own distinct costumes and traditions. The celebration of uniqueness and personal autonomy can make it tricky to answer the question of identity without feeling disconnected from a collective cultural heritage. This disconnect becomes especially evident in our everyday language. We all know what it is or what it means to have an identity crisis or to find ourselves. We talk about the need for self expression or getting in touch with one feeling, with our feelings. And when we are feeling off, we might say, I'm just not myself today, or I'm lost. We even make conscious efforts to get ourselves together. In many ways, becoming who we are is often framed as an individual struggle, something we have to work on ourselves, something in opposition to what society expects of us. This tension between personal authenticity and societal roles plays out in how we view others, and the people who are around us. We tend to dislike people who seem fake or playing a role, labeling them as phonies, fake, and with other adjectives. On the flip side, we admire those who appear, quote unquote, real or authentic. This fascination with authenticity reflects our ongoing quest to understand who we are, both as individuals and as part of a larger, even ever-changing social landscape. The inequality between me and you, and this uniquely American emphasis on self-expression and the general discomfort with social authority aren't just superficial cliches. They deeply influence how, for example, Americans think, interact, and make choices throughout their lives. From an early age, American children are raised to be independent thinkers, encouraged to do things by themselves, encouraged by their parents, particularly teachers alike, to explore different opinions, different options, form their own opinions, and stand apart from the group. It's not just about fitting in, it's about standing out, about showing the world who they are through their personal preferences, choices, outfit, and unique perspectives. This emphasis on individuality starts incredibly early. American parents expect their children to begin showing their personal quote-unquote preferences almost as soon as they are born, even before they can speak. Babies are given choices, and their reactions are seen as early signs of developing a distinct personality. This process of discovering and asserting oneself is deeply tied to the broader belief or the kind of a more broader expectation about what we understand under the concept of autonomy. That by exploring their own likes and dislikes, children will grow into empowered individuals who can navigate life on their own terms. In American culture, for example, this path to independence and self-assertion is seen as essential for achieving personal success. It's believed that in a highly competitive world, people who know who they are and can assert their individuality will lead more fulfilling, successful, content lives. This ideal of autonomy is a core value in shaping identity, one that is in fact introduced in infancy and reinforced at the very stage and in every stage of childhood and adolescence of the children, reflecting the deep-seated American belief in personal freedom and self-determination. Now, moving forward, while our modern obsession with self-discovery and authenticity might seem like an kind of inescapable part of life, this focus on being true to ourselves is actually a relatively recent development. Let's take psychoanalysis as an example. In the late 19th century, when the field psychology was still in its infancy, young women in Vienna's, so Austria, patriarchal bourgeois society often suffered from hysterical neurosis, a condition where their frustrations and emotional repression were symbolically acted out through physical symptoms. These women weren't searching for their quote-unquote authentic selves in the way we think about identity today. They were simply trapped in restrictive and oppressive circumstances, yearning for an escape. Back then, the idea that identity itself could be problematic didn't even cross people's minds. Fast forward towards today, our contemporary time, and hysteria is almost a forgotten diagnosis. Which psychoanalyst or psychotherapist would ever tell his or her patients, you are hysteric or you have hysteria? Instead, therapy now deals with a host of new issues like borderline personality disorder, anorexia, post-traumatic stress disorder, so-called PTSD, and dissociative identity disorder, conditions that all center around the fragmentation or instability of the self, or, with other words, identity. The shift in the focus of therapy from repression and neurosis to concerns about identity and how it's constructed and how it has been structured mirrors the broader changes happening in our society. Our world has become increasingly fluid, complex, and let's say hybridized. And it seems to be very hybrid and being very, at the same time, numb. The traditional family structure and the patriarchal values that once governed society are now under scrutiny, and they will be looked upon very, very critically, while advances in the technology and globalization have blurred the boundaries of reality as we know it. In this rapidly changing world, long-standing certainties have been shaken, and we've begun to question the very essence of what it meant to be or means to be very clear for us. Or what does it mean to be a human? This evolving context has made the quest for personal identity more relevant and pressing, that it's more important than ever before. The issue we are discussing here seeks to place these modern concerns about identity and language into a broader philosophical and sometimes anthropological framework, allowing us to see how this shift in focus reflects deeper structural transformations in society. It encourages us to examine how the fluidity and uncertainty of contemporary life have reshaped, if I can use this term, our understanding of who we are and how we define ourselves. And in this scope, I would like to talk about something that I would call it a self-knowledge or self-recognition. At first glance, asking the very classical question, who am I? And seriously searching for one's true identity might seem like a strange, almost absurd, right? I mean, after all, isn't obvious to everyone, except perhaps a character like humorous figures in the 1001 Night, like Mullah Nasruddin, or I don't know, some ironic figures that all human beings are, in fact, perpetually and unavoidably themselves. I mean, what is this question? Who am I? Isn't it a fact that we intuitively, absolutely, and without doubt know ourselves as living besides or living bodies? We are constantly driven by physical sensations like hunger, thirst, pain, and desire, and swept up by emotions such as grief, anger, shame, longing, and fear. These powerful forces within us makes it seemingly inevitable for everyone, each of us, me and you, and the people out there, no matter how philosophically inclined, to recognize their so-called selfhood through their embodied experiences. Let me give you an example. If someone questions their own identity, as some might, maybe one has to spend some hour in dentist's chair and would or should swiftly clear up that confusion who that person is. Physical sensations, therefore, can ground us in the undeniable reality of our own existence. But it isn't just the body's immediate pleasure and pain that confirm our sense of self or our sense of identity. All human beings possess hopes, dreams, and memories of a unique personal past that continually shape and affirm their identity. These memories and aspirations are intimately tied to the individual, providing a framework for understanding oneself as a distinct person moving through time. Our minds are filled with personal thoughts, beliefs, and ideas that give direction to our lives, further reinforcing the sense of a, let's say, stable, coherent identity. Moreover, we aren't isolated in this self-certainty. Others around us, I mean family and friends and society, confirm and acknowledge our quote-unquote identity. They recognize us, right? They remember us. They call us by name and thereby place us within a web of human relationships that give context and meaning to our very existence. This social confirmation adds another layer of certainty to our sense of who we are, grounding us within a community that reflects back a sense of belonging and, at the same time, individuality. In many religious traditions, particularly the Abrahamic ones, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there is yet another dimension to this to this sense of self and identity. This is the soul. According to this inspirational religious traditions, every person possesses a unique eternal soul that will either be saved, redeemed, or condemned after death. This soul, believed to be our deepest essence, yearns for goodness and recoils from evil. It's in moments of moral reflection, pangs of conscience, or religious communication, or communion, or bat mitzvah, or bar mitzvah, that we catch a glimpse of this spiritual aspect of our being. From a theological standpoint, this spiritual dimension reveals the truest nature of our identity, something that cannot easily be dismissed. So, when we consider all these aspects, our bodily existence, our personal memories, our thoughts, dreams, our place in social relationships, and our spiritual yearnings, our religious identity, it seems difficult to dispute the immediacy and the reality of the self, the identity. In this view, the question, who am I, might not be very puzzling after all. Okay, absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. The question, who am I, undeniably brings us back to language. It's a question that doesn't just float in the abstract, in the air. It's something we express, articulate, and share thought, what we call language. And yes, as you might have noticed, I'm deliberately emphasizing the word expressed, because that's the crux of it. The way we communicate our thoughts, identity, and even our doubts about identity itself is all bound up in this thing called language. Now, I know we have touched on lots of topics already, and of course just scratched the surface, and much of it, as I've expressed again, cynically stressing the word expressed, might seem like it isn't only tangibly related to language and identity, but there is a big but. We have only scratched the surface. My hope is that in the future sessions, we'll dive deeper and start examining this connection more concretely. Yet again, and this is another big but, I have a question for you. While I may not have covered even the basics of this vast topic, language and identity, I hope I have at least given you a preview of how deeply intertwined they are. Think about it. Everything I've discussed so far has been expressed. Oh yes, expressed through language. Without it, how would you ever be able, you as my listener, to understand me? It almost feels like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But I promise you, we'll tackle that paradox in the next episode. So, don't miss the next one. If you found this episode intriguing, share it with your family and friends. Until then, take care and bye.